You're listening to Data Center Therapy. Please take a number, and an engineer will be right with you. Hey there, everybody. Good day, and welcome to Episode 4 of Data Center Therapy, a podcast by IVOXY Consulting. I am Matt Yeti, and I am joined, as always, by Mr. Chris Crow. Chris, how you doing?
Excellent, thank you. Good day, everybody.
It's very good to hear your voice. And we are joined by another one of our consulting engineers, Mr. Matt Cozzolino, not to be confused with Matt Merrily, one of our account managers. We like to keep guys in threes, apparently.
We only hire Matts now. It's part of the...
It's the cool new thing.
Matt is the original Matt at IVOXY. He owns Matt at IVOXY.com, so I got stuck with Matt.Yeti or Matt Y. I also stole the letter M, in case you want.
That's very postmodern.
You know. Matt, how you doing?
Pretty good. Pretty good.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. No problem. I'm looking forward to this. This is my actually first podcast ever, so that'll be fun.
Really? So that was a backhanded excuse, if I've ever heard one. Like, hey, if I'm terrible.
When he tongue ties and everything else.
Mumble.
Well, Matt, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, personally, professionally, whatever you feel like sharing? Not too deep, though. Be careful.
Not too deep. So I've been, I think it's 6 or 7 years now with IVOXY. Started out doing system storage, VMware, all that fun stuff. Moved to networking. Been doing that for a couple years now, and really kind of got deep into the security side. It's been pretty cool. Outside of that, there's sailing, there's skiing, there's first aid, there's I have a dog, which takes up so much freaking time. That's me. Well,
so tell me a little bit about the dog. I want to hear about the dog.
You want to hear about the dog? 3-year-old Australian cattle dog. So anyone that knows dogs knows that they are smart, and smart dogs need a lot of energy. They need a job. They need something to do to keep them occupied. I can throw the ball and run her for an hour, and She'll still want to do something. So it's gotta be, here, do these tricks, here, jump over this thing, here, do something, work for whatever, so that you don't wake me up in the middle of the night, even though you're going to anyway.
And I heard you mention sailing as well. Am I going to be seeing you on ESPN anytime soon?
No, not that level of sailing. When I first started learning, we were doing the racing, and so that was kind of like the softball team for work, right? It's just a bunch of people with boats that just go out and race a course because it's fun to go sailing. That learned me to sail, and then now it's more like, hey, let's go out and drink a couple of beers and sail around and maybe take a vacation and do some crabbing, that kind of a thing.
Man, sign me up.
Yeah.
Except for the boat part.
Except for the boat part.
You know.
The crab and the beer drinking, yeah. Okay.
It all depends on who's driving.
That's a good point, Chris. So as Matt alluded to in a little bit of his background, is he's now pretty heavy into the security, and that happens to be our focus on this episode of Data Center Therapy. Specifically, some of the solutions that Matt's been working with Palo Alto. One of the, I don't know if you want to say the newer firewall, next generation firewall vendors. They do more than
firewall. Yeah.
Next generation. It's air quotes for those who can't see. Chris, you can talk to a little bit about this in that IVOXY's 11 or 12 year history now really kind of rode the wave of the virtualization train, essentially, and all things virtual and how it relates to the data center and advanced data center technologies being embraced by anybody and everybody, and through no fault of anybody, but budgets get allocated where they are. It seems like security is often an afterthought. It kind of sits over there with disaster recovery a little bit, where, boy, it costs this much. I hate to, we don't really have the budget for that or whatever. And how many news articles do you need to read over the last few years, Target, et cetera, to know the pain that kind of attitude can bring, right, Chris?
Oh yeah. It's almost like your car insurance. You're very upset about paying it until you get into an accident. And And it does seem to be one of the earlier things that gets cut from budgets, except places that have already had a compromise. And it's funny, you mentioned DR. It's a similar thing, right? The people or the companies with the best DR plans are often ones that had something happen to them. It's like this is real now, not just rolling the dice of probability. Maybe a lot of us like to be gamblers up here. So, but yeah, it's and I feel like it's getting more and more important as with security, and especially around security solutions that are more than just plugins for existing technologies. Right? It's one thing to have a point solution that drops in. To simply do firewalling on an ESX server. It's something else to be able to combine firewalls both on-prem and in the cloud, because a lot of my customers' data centers are spreading more and more out to, you're right, with hybrid cloud initiatives, with multiple data centers as bandwidth keeps increasing. And like you also mentioned, Matt, there's a lot of articles in the news about compromises or data not being stored and encrypted, or not being encrypted in transport, that will hopefully change people's minds a little bit, because there's not less data, and there's not less bandwidth, and there's not less users. So I think it's something that people are going to invest in more. At least,
and one thing you said there was there's also not less complexity.
Right.
So, I mean, like you said sprawling out, more bandwidth, more locations, geosites, that the complexity increases. And a lot of times, too, with our industry, a lot can be solved with tech. A lot can. But security is one of those areas where you need a two-pronged approach. The technology is
more than two prongs, but yeah.
Well, and I want you to go into that, Matt. But you've got no more than 50% is the tech. A big chunk of it is the policy. Yeah. You need to define what your approach is, what your goals are, and a lot of times the tail kind of wags the dog sometimes. Okay, we just bought this software. How do we implement it right? Well, what do you need it to do? And then you just get the blank stare. And it's, again, through no fault of the recipient of that question, but there is a lot to think about before plopping down the old credit card, so to speak.
Yeah, and one of the things that is interesting about security for me is it's kind of the opposite of what users want, right? If we put in a new storage appliance, or upgrade somebody's operating system, or upgrade to a new version of Outlook, that's something that, or roll out a new iOS release corporately, people like to see that sort of thing, where security is always something that our end users don't want to see. It's two-factor authentication. It's going through a VPN. It's going through a jump box. It's putting barriers in place for us to get to our data and applications. And that can be difficult to navigate, to keep users happy while still keeping things secure, which is another challenge with this.
Yeah, and really, that's one of your most sensitive areas is user buy-in, right? If the executive level gets a ton of pushback, it may be all for naught. It doesn't matter if it's what's good for you. A lot of times it comes down to user experience, and if there's too much friction, and it makes my job that much more painful, it might be, you fear that it could get rolled back and for sake of ease of use versus proper security. And with all that said, Matt, where have you been picking up on, and especially the things that might not come to the forefront of your thoughts when thinking about security, but are just as important as the easy layup stuff that you think about?
So the things that come to mind for me when we talk about security for customers is kind of where it's going, and I find a lot of time I'm educating customers on the fact that there's more than just a firewall, and the way we try to secure an environment now is kind of changed from that traditional port and protocol, I'm going to allow port 80 through, to now I've got to actually define what these applications are. I've got to define what I'm allowing my users to connect to. And Chris, you had mentioned the kind of having to deal with a larger environment and that larger process. When we talk about a DR solution, there's that need for where is my data going, how am I getting my users there, how do I restore my machines there. There's a whole lot of questions that go into that. It's the same kind of thing with security. I can put in a firewall, we can do that and move you from this product to that product, but at the end of the day, you need actually a whole lot of internal policy and work with your customers, with your end users to define what policy needs to be put on that firewall. And that's a lot of work that's totally not technical, I want to say. It's not turning a knob on a firewall. It's actually having meetings with customers, meetings with people, and figuring out what's going to work for the company.
It's so funny. You mentioned it's not just a firewall anymore. And it's striking when, we've been in this industry long enough where we can think back 10 or 15 or 20 years ago where that was your security posture. I have an ASA. I'm good. I've checked the box of security. Mm-hmm. And now that's north-south traffic. What happens when that one email gets clicked on? That's it. Mm-hmm. That's it. And how do you deal with that now? Because that's the reality. I mean, a firewall is almost, it's a given, but it's not even the most important piece anymore, right?
Right. So you look at how a attack happens, how malware happens, or a crypto locker or whatever, and it's more than just there's a couple of steps in it. I have to get that file into the environment. I have to execute that file in the environment. I have to phone home so that I can talk to and then control that, the command and control portion of it. I have to exfiltrate data. I have to lock data, or whatever. There's multiple steps to make that happen. And we had talked earlier about, here's a point solution. I need to buy a firewall. I need to do a thing so I can check that box. And it ends up being more than that, because you do need to protect that in its entirety. You need to have multiple layers. You need to have a firewall northbound out to your internet. You need to have a firewall or security policy east and west between your data center and your users. You need antivirus on your machines. You need monitoring of outbound traffic to see whether something's exfiltrating, leaving the network. There's a whole lot more than just I put a firewall in and I allowed traffic and I disallowed this other traffic. There's so much more to it that you have to work with your customers and figure out what applications are actually important and actually being used in the environment.
So you've seen a lot out there, specifically with Palo Alto, as kind of on the front foot of the security posture that we like to promulgate here at IVOXY. What would you say some of the unique things they're doing that really excites you about the security arena right now?
There's a couple of things. One, the devices themselves I find them really easy to use. It's really easy to go into them and track down what applications are being used, and then turn that into a policy. So, for example, Office 365 is the application we're going to use for the internet. I can write my rules, write my first policy, and say allow traffic, and I can watch you as a user, I can watch me as a user go out and access Office 365, and then see what kind of application that is, see what ports it needs, and then use that to tune my rules. So the ability of then defining this application and saying I'm going to allow Office 365 as an application, keep it secure, becomes much easier to consume. That's one of them. The other one is the software that the Palos are running is the same, be it a physical box or a virtual machine in Azure or AWS, or even a VM on a Hyper-V or VMware environment. It's the same software. So I can take my policy, here's my Office 365 policy, and plop it down onto whatever version, wherever I need it to be.
Yeah. So in terms of on-premise and cloud, a lot of people are talking, you just mentioned it, Azure and AWS. A lot of people say, okay, well, what about the cloud? How does Palo Alto play in that space? How are you securing your workloads that are on-premise versus what you might have out there? How do you keep that consistent?
Right. So, there's management tools. Everything's got a management tool. In the Palo Alto space, it's Panorama. The process that I think is important to understand about that is moving to the cloud, right? So for example, moving to AWS doesn't immediately mean I don't have these problems. What it means is that Amazon is going to handle my machine, my underlying hypervisor, my hardware, my storage, all of that infrastructure, and I'm still tasked with securing the application that I put out there. So if I put a web server on Amazon and I just stick it up there and I make it available on the internet, it's just like sticking a computer on the internet at home or at work, or opening all of the ports to that server. I still have to have some sort of policy in front of that. I still have to have some device that is watching that traffic and allowing or disallowing the appropriate connections to the server, right?
I like how you said that, though. A lot of times people, and there's gonna be a theme over these episodes that I'm gonna kind of wax philosophical about the cloud, and a lot of people think that, oh, I put it up there, it's all taken care of, and you know, at IVOXY, we're an Office 365 customer. We don't want to dedicate staff to managing infrastructure, and even though we have a lab and do training, and Chris is kind of our de facto lab manager guy anyway. In your free time, right, Chris?
Monkey.
But yeah, to that point, we don't want to have to worry about patching servers, or let's say the Exchange server crashes. Oh, everybody's out at a customer at meetings. It's just, we need to have that running, so we do leverage the cloud. But at the same time, I do think it's, and I've mentioned this before, it requires a degree of caution and skepticism in terms of let's open our eyes and say what our requirements are. And so you made a great point, man, in that just by putting stuff out there, you still have the responsibility to manage your data and the application that runs on that infrastructure that the cloud providers give you.
Right. There's a difference between an application as a service, right? Office 365, Exchange, and infrastructure as a service. AWS, here's a machine, and you can do whatever you want on that machine. Those are two totally different environments. One lends itself more to here's my set of users that can log in, and I have to do two-factor authentication. You're going to manage the entirety of that application, versus here's just somewhere to run some stuff, and now I have to actually continue to worry about how am I securing it.
Yeah, and so one thing I'm curious about, Mr. Cozzolino, is really where the firewall is being deployed inside of cloud providers. And that's one of the things that we do like about Palo Alto is in a virtual environment, I can deploy that as a virtual appliance on ESX servers, and combined with NSX, I can affect firewall policies that are outside of the virtual machine, but still are enacted at a per virtual machine level. So the classic example is two servers that are on the same segment. I can set a policy where they cannot talk between each other. Where is the place that inside of AWS that Palo Alto is affecting the firewall? Is it just an AMI that gets deployed inside of a network and connects places kind of traditionally? Or is there an agent? I haven't looked at this a lot. So
from what I've seen, we don't have that same kind of level as like that NSX parity. I want to firewall all of these specific devices. I believe you can get the same kind of functionality by locking down the ACLs and limiting communication between devices unless it flows through this security device. When you really start taking a look at the VPC in an Amazon deployment, it's a subnet, and then you plug in a router instance, and then you define some subnets on it, and then you bolt on a VPN connection, and then you deploy a firewall into it, and then you deploy some VMs onto this subnet. It's not that much different than networking on a data center, in a data center, right?
Okay, nice.
So Matt, I see here that we want to talk about Palo Alto SLR.
Sure.
I want you to do me a favor and define SLR for me and anybody else listening who might not know.
You ready for a marketing term? Security Lifecycle Review.
Okay.
SLR. Yeah, there you go. That's what SLR stands for. Really, so what we do with the SLR is excuse me. we have a number of firewalls. We have a number of Palo Alto firewalls. I would, as an engineer, bring one out to you on your customer site, and we'd stick it in your environment. What I'd like to do is I'd like to take your outbound internet connection, so whatever between your core switching environment that plugs into that firewall, your existing firewall, I'd like to span that, create a tap off of that so that I can see the traffic without actually being in line, and then I just send it into the Palo. At that point, the Palo sees that outbound internet traffic, can't do anything with it because it's not actually in line, but it sees it, and it'll do its app categorization, it'll do its IP matching, its user mapping. We can set up whatever services we want, so we could do Active Directory querying and get an IP to username match and see where Matt Yeti is going on the internet. We can see what applications we have. We can see what kind of traffic we're actually seeing out to the internet. We'll let that run for a week, collect its data, and then I'll do a download off of the system and collect a tech support type file, which has kind of all of that information. I plug it into a tool, and it generates a nice report. And that report will give us stuff like, what applications are you using on the internet? It'll show Office 365, Dropbox, Drive, Gmail, Skype, Facebook, all of the things that people are visiting. And it'll give us a level of how much data we're actually sending out to those applications. I actually did one for a customer, and surprisingly, it was the surprising application was, I want to say Snapchat was like over the course of a week, 3 gigs. I'm like,
does this company employ a bunch of 14-year-olds?
Kind of actually.
You might want to look at the child labor laws more than anything after that.
14, 18, is there really a difference there?
Oh, we're old.
Ooh.
Apologies.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy. So does this also, Matt, would this identify, let's say I've got a system that is absolutely infected. Will that call that out, or is this more like a profile and that kind of stuff is not identified during this phase of the discovery?
So it will call that out. It will identify systems that are sending a bunch of traffic, right? So there's one of them that's a risk group of command and control, right? So if I see a bunch of command and control traffic, I know as an engineer that that's something that we should actually take a look at. So my report's automatically going to say, here's all this command and control traffic. Here's the 5 machines that are sending data to them, right? So
very neat.
Yeah, so I can get that kind of data. Really, that kind of goes into the thing we were talking about earlier about how do I write policy? How do I view what's happening on the environment? It creates a nice report to present, to talk to a customer about, to talk to management about. It makes it pretty. Truly, all of that data is sitting there on the box, and you can make a report look however you want, right?
Are we talking physical only, or is this a virtual appliance option as well?
There's no reason I couldn't do it on a virtual machine. It's way easier.
You typically see it physical, though.
Yeah, it's way easier to stick a physical box out there. There's I might ask for your help on getting a span port to trunk data into or pass data into a virtual machine, which would be the biggest difficulty I'd see on, right?
And that is a difficulty.
Yeah, that would be the hardest thing to do. So why do that when I can just, come down, spend a couple hours, go to lunch, drop a box in, configure it,
see in a week.
Yeah.
Well, that's very cool. I'm glad you explained that to me, Matt, because I'm going to bring that up with my customers as well, because it seems like a no-brainer, because I hard pressed to find people who would honestly be able to say and claim, yes, I have a handle on all of our outbound, our egress traffic, and know what our systems are doing. Mm-hmm. And at the very least, that kind of enlightens you as to what areas you need to focus on, I would think. So I can imagine there's anybody who wouldn't benefit from something like that.
Right, exactly. It highlights the actual traffic and what's actually running on your environment, which a lot of people don't know.
A lot of what we do at IVOXY is based around workshops, right, Chris? Mm-hmm. We have disaster recovery workshops, and it really is a lot of work before a single piece of software is installed or configured. like we've been talking about. It's getting the stakeholders in the room and making the decisions, deciding the policy, and then approaching the project with that posture. This just strikes me. This is a network security workshop. Here's the information. What do you want to do about it? How do we want to design our policy?
Yeah. That's, policy is one of those ones that I made a little note about. There's kind of two general ways to look at it. You can whitelist or blacklist your environment, right? And then everything else is that gray area in the middle. So you can take the approach of no one gets to anything unless I specifically define it, right? I'm going to blacklist the entire internet. Or whitelist, I'm sorry, I had that wrong. Whitelist the applications that I need. Or I'm going to allow everyone to get to everything except for these known bad items, right? And there's a management overhead that goes with that. And there's a real decision that the company needs to make. And it ends up being a manpower and time invested in management decision. Not management from, like, you're my supervisor, but management from, if I'm not allowing anything on the internet, now I have to go into this device all the time and allow this user to get to this thing because they need it. And then this user needs to get to that thing because they need it. And, right?
Security's existed for a long time. I mean, you remember, Matt, port security on a Cisco switch. Mm-hmm. Brilliant idea. An additional MAC address shows up on this port. If you've got an office where people can walk in and plug stuff in, somebody brings in a Linksys router or wireless router, and all of a sudden your corporate network has blasted over a wide open wireless network and shut that port down. But the answer is, that's great. Where am I going to get the money to hire an FTE to manage every time a port somebody switches something or moves a printer? Mm-hmm. And I think making that manageable and visible clearly without requiring a ton of management overhead time is the trick here.
Right. And that's where the subscription services come in. Cisco's got their Umbrella DNS service, and then who's doing the dynamic updates for the ASAs? Bright Cloud, I want to say. Palo Alto's got their own. So they're seeing all that traffic. They're seeing all of that data. They're collecting it from the entirety of the internet. And that's literally their job, is to categorize this. So when you get a new DNS entry resolves to an IP address that you've been seeing command and control traffic to, now you've got a mechanism to plug that into a database that says, I'm going to categorize this URL, categorize this IP address as this. And then those updates get pushed down to all of the customers, and that kind of tries to keep up. It's always a catch-up game. I never see us being able to be in front of that.
Yeah, but I mean, that's so huge. Remember the old version of antivirus with heuristics or whatever word they use for AI or machine learning. But the thing is, that's all well and good for your local machine. Back in the days, early internet, how do you get back and say, hey, Symantec, look what I found. Now let everybody else know. There really was no way. Symantec knew about it. They went through their product release cycle, wrapped up a new virus definition database. Then they push an update every, month. Mm-hmm. Where now when you're talking, hey, here's a command and control, within seconds it's identified as a botnet. And then every Palo Alto out there now knows about it within minutes. I mean, the fact that you can mitigate a global, viral epidemic like that is pretty amazing. And I think, like you said, that's the worth right there in its weight for the prescription or subscription service.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that. More and more, I used to want to do a lot of stuff, right? I'll run a Raspberry Pi to do whatever. I want to build my own firewall. I'm going to take my old DD-WRT-54G and install, or my WRT-54G and install DDRT router, whatever on it, right? No, I want to pay someone actually to manage that.
Can you tell how old we are at this point? Because it's a cycle and it's so predictable, and it's true, right, Chris?
I can't. Well, as an IT generalist, and there's certain things we specialize in, but there's a lot that we don't. And even as a security person, you can't specialize in threat detection by sitting to find every zero-day exploit and then what strings to be looking at in order to program your firewall. It is simply impractical. So it feels more like just an evolution of us becoming more specialized, more efficient, and And an easy way to do that is a subscription service for some of this, because even at home, and I'm with you, Matt, I love to tweak this sort of thing. I don't have as much time to do that. It's better if I hook up a DNS service to keep my kids out of places that they shouldn't be.
There's also that economy of scale, right? One person, can't handle the entire internet. That's why we pay for this entire group to monitor that of people that are sitting in a NOC and doing this day in, day out, and there's a team.
Yeah.
And plus, Chris, you've got the wife acceptance factor to worry about as well.
That is
you
true.
can't go ahead and bring down Plex or anything like that, lest the pitchforks and torches come out.
Yeah.
The number of text messages I get when something's down for a minute. Holy crap.
Even my home lab, because I think I mentioned in a previous podcast, I have other consultants connecting in. I absolutely know when a connection goes down, because their View labs go with them. So, yeah, it's I'm seriously considering that colo idea, Mr. Cozzolino. It might make things a little easier. So,
well, if you want to learn more,
actually,
if you want to learn more, hit our website, ivoxy.com/palo-alto. Actually, if you want to learn more about what we talked about today, more about the PA story, and we will have that in the show notes, the link as well. If you go to ivoxy.com, we have a blog where we kind of summarize our podcast episodes, and Dustin, our marketing director, does a great job getting all of that put away, because I would botch it completely. So thank you for that, Dustin, and that'll be up on the site. So now I'm still waiting for a jingle, Mr. Crow, but
that's right.
we're moving on to our segment. I've never seen that before, and Chris, I did the jazz hands too, but you can't see it on the podcast, obviously, but they're there. You have an interesting one on this time around, Chris.
Yeah, so I had a customer that was running 6.0, vSphere 6.0. Looking to upgrade to 6.5 that we were engaged to help out with, and nothing crazy about this. I mean, rack mount servers, running a Windows version of vCenter, using a Rubrik as a backup appliance. Of course, a Rubrik uses, like everybody else does, and they have some secret sauce in there, but fundamentally they're using VADP, the API to do protection, where we're pulling complete VMDKs out of a system. Well, VADP and these network-based dumps rely on a technology called change block tracking. And change block tracking it's really a bitmap that when I back up an entire virtual machine, I create this bitmap file, and then as blocks change, I update what I've changed inside of this bitmap file. This is what allows that forever incremental to actually happen. Well, when we get through the upgrade of vCenter, everything's fine. We will go to upgrade one of the ESX hosts from 6.0 to 6.5. And it seems to have not deleted the change block tracking file, but discards it when the next backup happens on this host. So we go to do an incremental. The host reports back, yeah, I have a file, but I can't really use it. And so you're going to have to take a full backup. So imagine we were going from a 5% change rate in the evening to suddenly needing to back up terabytes and terabytes and terabytes. And of course, over network-based dumps, I'm limited to 53 megabytes per second from that backup speed, which obviously caused an issue. So, in my never seen that before, and this is my poor attempt at crowdsourcing, drop me a line if you have seen this, because I was looking for all sorts of information, obviously engaging VMware and Rubrik, and left us all kind of scratching our heads as to why. And this is something that's actually still ongoing. And if anybody has a solution for it, again, I'm still waiting for somebody to solve one of my challenges for a hand-delivered bottle of beer, provided you live in Western Washington.
And that is a head scratcher, Chris, because we stayed on the same data store, right?
Yeah,
as well.
Nothing else
So,
changed.
I mean, as it stands, the files were the same, identical before the upgrade and after. That they're not touched by the ESX upgrade process.
And of course, we've seen issues with GA 6.5 with change block tracking issues, as well as actually GA 6.0. There were some bugs where that could be discarded. None of that actually applied here in any way that I could see. So, like I said, drop an email to the podcast. I'd be happy to provide some more version information. It's podcast@ivoxy.com. Because, that's certainly a bit of a head-scratcher.
Can we blame the network guy?
Probably.
That's what I
Cozzolino?
do. Yeah.
Cozzo?
Everyone does anyway.
The
So.
Well, thanks for the anecdote, Chris. Yes, and like Chris said, if you have any questions or on Chris's topic or anything you want us to chat about or have a question, email us at podcast@ivoxy.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes. We are on Google Play. We're on Stitcher. We're on Overcast. Overcast is my favorite. I'm an iOS user, and while we are in the Apple Podcast app that comes installed on every iPhone, I prefer Overcast. There's actually a little thing I like here. Is the guy, I think his name is, poor guy. I think it's like Marcus Laurent or whatever. But he is the actual, whatever his name is, he wrote Overcast, this independent single developer. He's got a podcast that I listen to from time to time called Under the Radar. It's if you're a dev at all, you'll like it. It's never longer than 30 minutes, which is what we're aspiring to here. We're a little over today, but we want to keep these things bite-sized and consumable for like a commute. But he does a podcast that they basically talk about new developments in iOS SDKs and things like that, and on the development side of things. And he wrote Overcast, and just kind of a little cool anecdote that this is one developer who wrote an app for the iPhone, and it happens to be my favorite podcast app. So yes, we're on Overcast, and if you like us, give us a subscription and leave us a review. 5-star only, of course, right? But
They'll knock off a star because of our getting tongue-tied and other very bad jokes.
if you like it, give it 5 stars. If you don't, email Chris Crow.
There you go.
Yeah. Matt Cozzolino, thank you for joining us. That was really insightful. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. It was actually quite fun.
Awesome. Well, we hope to have you on again in the very near future. I want to hear more stories about the boat and all of that stuff.
Look forward to it. I just did a big vacation, so I got all sorts of stuff.
All right, we're going to have to open up a new segment, I think.
Yep, it have to be next time. Haha, teaser, right? That's what that is.
There you go. Cliffhanger.
There you go.
Well, Matt, thanks again. Chris, always good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us. And thank you all for listening to Data Center Therapy. We'll see you next time.